Okay, so this unit is on data types, variables, and input. So this refers to the stuff that when you write a computer program, you're expecting the user to probably enter something in to be used, and that would be input. For our programs, we're going to start out by just assuming that the user is going to be entering it on the keyboard. So we're going to work with just keyboard input for now. But of course, there's file input and input from other things too. Um, so in the document, you'll see that there are various different types of data. So data meaning, is the user entering names or numbers or, what stuff is the user expected to enter. And in Java programming language and many others, the programmer has to know ahead of time if that's going to be an integer or a character. If it's a character, they would define it as a type char. These are all reserved words in Java. If the programmer is expecting the user to enter an integer, then they would define it as an int. Double is those decimal value numbers like 13.7. And then a string is handled slightly differently in Java, but a string would be like a string of characters, or we call that a word or a phrase. And then Boolean is named after a guy whose last name is Boole, and that's just true or false. And we'll see all of those where they're used. So there's some rules about variables. First of all, in this class, and if you go on to be a programmer, you always want your variable names to describe what they're doing. For example, a variable name like points pass might describe that this variable is going to hold the points possible. Or variable score. This variable is going to hold a score. Um, Letter grade. This is probably a character, a char, because it's going to hold the letter grade. Or the student name, I'm sure that's supposed to be a string. So, because they're going to be entering their name. And then I have here just the different types of data and what size in memory um, that takes up. We're not going to have to worry about memory in this class, but if you go on in programming, it becomes a pretty big deal. There's also types of variables that are constant. They're not going to change throughout the program. Example would be pi. Pi isn't going to change. It's going to stay 3.14172. So if you want to define something as a constant, you use the word final. Final means it's going to stay this way. Double is the type of data it is. Okay, since this is a decimal number, it's a double. Pi is my variable name. I just called it pi. I could have called it PIE. I could have called it P. I could have called it whatever I want. And then the assignment operator is equals sign. That means I want to put this value 3.14172 into that variable, which is a double, and it's final. Okay, some rules about variable names. You can't use keywords, obviously. So I can't use the word int, for example, or the word main, or public. You can't use spaces in your variable names. You can't start with a number or a symbol of any type. So for example, this would not be acceptable. I would get an error, a syntax error, if I tried to use that number of students like that for my variable name. Same with either of these two. I would get a syntax error. Um, Name is fine. Name 2 is fine. Uh, char would not be good because I'd get an error. That's already a predefined word. Degrees space Celsius, nope. It's got a space in it, so you can't use it. And then I put some other ones on there because I want you guys to look at the predefined terms. And I talk a little bit about memory here. You don't really have to understand a whole lot about memory when you're programming at this level, but eventually you'll want to. There's basically three types of errors. Syntax error, everybody's going to see lots of those. That's when you forget a character, you forget a semicolon, you spell something wrong. Those are all syntax errors. Runtime errors occur, it'll compile fine, but when you run it, you'll get an error. Some examples of this, you might spell main with a capital M. That'll compile fine, but when you run it, you're going to have some issues. Or if you're doing something in your code that ultimately leads to dividing by zero, um, that would be a runtime error. And then logic errors are probably the hardest ones to find. Those are things like, say I want to find the average of something. A logic error would be if I accidentally put in something like average is uh, the grades 98 plus 97 plus 79 divided by 3. That's a logic error because this is not finding the average currently. Of course, you'd have to put parentheses around those first three. Now it's not a logic error. So logic error is, I call that human error. That's when your program runs perfectly fine. It looks great for all practical purposes, but it's not giving the output it should. In your homework, you're going to have to look for those types of errors. So then I have your key in. You'll go out to the key in, and I have some strings set up here. The thing about input in Java is that Java will only allow you to read in a string. It won't allow you to read in ints. It won't allow you to read in characters. It won't allow you to read in doubles, only strings. If you want to use it as an integer or something like that, you still have to read it in as a string. See, num to be read is a string. Num to be read is a string. But then I'm going to convert it, or in Java we call that parsing. So I'm going to convert num to be read into an integer number. So see how I have num here, and num is the name of the variable that's an integer, equals this integer dot parse int actually goes out to a different program. It grabs the integer value of this string, num to be read. So once that's done, you can use num now as you would use any integer. You can add, you can subtract, you can do anything you want with it. Same thing with decimals. And the same thing with characters. With characters, instead of using parse, you use char at, and that just means character add. I put 0 here. So the way that Java does things is it'll take the character, like let's say you have a string that somebody entered like this. The H is character 0, the E is character 1, 2, 3, 4. Um, and then I have a message dialog box that spits all that stuff out, and you'll be answering some questions again. So once you're done with that key in, hopefully you'll learn all you need to know about data types. I put a list of the reserved words in your PDF file. And then I have 3 assignments for you. The first assignment, of course, is the key in that I gave you that we just looked at. You're going to not print it out and turn it in, but you're going to save it and upload it to Moodle. And then you have 2 tasks that you'll be doing on your own. Certainly you can copy paste if you need to, but really it's just one program, and while you're running that program, you're going to be looking for any errors that you might see. So good luck, and send me a message if you need any help.